It's like, I have the gift of gab.
So do I. It's crazy how much folks are like, whoa, like, wait, what? How can you do that?
Yeah, I think when you're also in technology, people assume that you're automatically going to be an introvert. So
Yeah, yeah,
definitely not me.
no, not at all.
All right, looks like we are live. Awesome. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the 12 Days of DFIRmas. We have made it to day 11. Can't believe it. Tomorrow is the last episode, and I am joined by Stephen Boyce. Stephen, will you introduce yourself and tell us how you got into the digital forensic community?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Stephen Boyce, director at Magnet Forensics. Really grew up in the industry straight out of high school, if you will. Really with a curiosity of figuring out how to not only tinker with technology but uncover things that people think were deleted, if you will. And so started out my career in the U.S. government, if you will, with the U.S. Department of State and the FBI. Had two internships simultaneously. So for those of you who are currently working on a undergrad or grad, internships were and still are very important in understanding what you could potentially do after college, or even for those transitioning potentially from active service, for instance. Those opportunities are really great for understanding what you could potentially do after you're done your studies, certifications, etc. And so um, really got a good flavor for both agencies and understanding the role that they play in ultimately, protecting whether it's the U.S. people, right, or engaging in diplomacy when it comes to technology. And so, at the end of my college time, if you will, my tenure, I went with the FBI for a full time employment where I was able to do digital forensics, and had a blast doing that all around the world, meeting various different folks in our industry now. It's crazy how small it is, and really got exposed to how things work here in the United States, but also when you're overseas, totally different. You're dealing with different power, weirdness, just yeah. And so all of that kind of the environment, doing forensics here, I'd say more stateside in a more controlled environment in a lab. Yeah, there was a lot of on scene activity, but totally different when you cross international waters, if you will. And really had a great time doing all those things when I was in the field, and then ended my career at the FBI back here in the DC area, if you will, just really doing more digital media exploitation for national security reasons, right? And so when you think about, um, counterterrorism and those type of investigations, it's very important to understand how we can use what we would consider forensic tools in order to exploit media at scale, right? And so not necessarily looking at going to court, not necessarily writing reports for court, not having to testify, all of that, but really using the tools that we use as forensicators to get actionable intelligence rather quickly, right? And so that's the unit that I was in, kind of, you know, at the last stop, if you will, on my journey in the FBI. And then as a part of that, I'd done various different TDYs. And so when you think around um, the MLAT process, right? And so whether it's another country wanting to get data or information in regards to their cases, um, that involves a U.S. service provider. So we can think of like the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Apples, etc. The MLAT office of the FBI, in conjunction with DOJ, does all of that with our international partners. And so, did a great TDY with them in trying to get them exposed to forensic tools for using subpoena and warrant returns, if you will, which is something that we do here quite a bit here on the state side. But that MLAT office was really set up um, many moons ago, more for traditional requests for law enforcement information, if you will. And so the whole concept of warrant returns and digital and technology was really new. And I was like, hey, we do this on the forensic side all the time. Why not look at the various different suite of forensic tools that are already out there, right? That work and doing that. And so I had a great time as a part of my TDY to the MLAT office, helping them kind of get set up for doing what they're doing now, and really at scale, right? Because there's, you name the country, there's investigations happening all the time, and they need information. And so figuring out different ways to use the products that we do to do our work as forensicators, but also applying that to other things. And so, um, yeah, that's a little bit about my background in digital forensics. I've obviously since left the government space and transitioned over into the private sector. And this magnet forensics is my third stop since I've left the government.
Wow.
Yeah,
But it sounds like you have a really extensive experience, but then also like very well rounded, like all of the different travel and opportunities you've had while you were in the government and then also transitioning to commercial. I feel
yeah,
like you're the perfect like guest for this podcast of blending all the other experience that we have from the other guests too. So that's really neat.
yeah.
So awesome. Well, since you have such an array of experience, can you kind of tell us what your like what trends or interests you have seen throughout 2023 in digital forensics is?
Yeah, I think, coming from the government space, um, we've always done forensics in a air gapped environment, right? Not
Yes.
connected. We've That's just been the principle of kind of how we've operated in our environment due to the forensic process and the integrity and the authenticity and all the great terms that
All the
we live
buzzwords.
by, right? Is drilled into our head through whether IASIS or whatever program you're going through on getting trained, is making sure there aren't changes to the evidence, etc. And so an air gap environment for us has been a no-brainer. But I really seen the shift this past year from labs, and I look at like kind of government, public sector, safety labs when it comes to forensics, really having to get away from what a term is called shadow IT, right? Which is where the forensic term is doing their thing, uh, and they're not connected, they're not touching the rest of the network, and there's legitimate reasons for that. But I think historically many of us have had to wear many hats, not only forensicators, but sysadmins, network engineers, um, you name it, right? Patch, vulnerability management, managers. We've had to do it all because we've been in that air gapped environment, kind of being segregated. And so what I've seen this year was a lot more labs and forensicators having to integrate with various different agency oversight, whether that's um, antivirus and endpoint detection being put on forensic machines in a world in which we advocated very strongly for not having those things on our system because we know what it does, right? It makes changes. We have, malware. We have all sorts of nefarious activity that are happening on, contraband digital evidence that we're seizing. And so, the possibility of it changing evidence was always a big worry for us, right? And so we've seen quite a shift across the board of interconnectivity of digital forensics labs because I think to any agency or any police department, we still pose a risk to that environment in not being connected to the overall network. And so I've seen a lot of, you know, historical relationships that they were like, we don't talk to IT, in where we're actually sitting at the table with everybody, right? And understanding, well, how do we make, where's the middle ground, right? Like we can't operate in just our own silo uh, anymore because for legitimate reasons, agency policies, etc. And so what's the middle ground, right? And so we've, worked with a lot of different agencies on, well, maybe if you're using endpoint detection on your forensics machine, not having it make changes. So it's still doing the scanning, right? It's still important. They need to know that it checks the box. Many boxes that are out there. That's just how it works in the law enforcement, public safety, and government space. But it checks the box, right? But we're not actually taking action. As in we're not removing. If we detect something, right? If we detect malware or something, we're not removing it because we want to protect the integrity of that. And so it's been a great year of what I would say is bringing forensics and IT slash security together in what was historically, we don't like each other, we don't get along, we don't talk to each other. And so um, I think that was really big. And then also, we're seeing more and more labs uh, and forensicators embracing the technology of a more connected way of doing forensics. And what that means is like, well, how do I do forensics um, in an environment where I need to grab things from like the cloud, right?
Yeah.
It's been very interesting, and we've seen a lot of agencies leveraging the cloud. DoD has long been doing this for many years, especially on the forward deployed assets. And I, as someone who's worked with them and folks, forward deployed, it's really been. It always was for me as a receiving end of that. I'm like really amazed at how far they were back then, right? And I say back then, it really wasn't that long ago, 2018, 2019, in using internet connectivity in order to transfer data, share data with partners. And it's just something for us as forensics was something that I probably like couldn't fathom, right? Is using internet connectivity um, and still being able to achieve forensics and still maintaining the integrity and authenticity and all that fun stuff. So
Awesome. Yeah, we're seeing a huge shift with blending technical
yeah,
teams together.
yeah,
And I think I come from a lab where that was always the standard, where we had a specific IT team that anything that the digital forensic analyst needed, they would just literally walk up to their desk and say, I need X, and it would happen. And they would be responsible for all the forensic machines and working with us. And then, well, we were spoiled. I
yeah,
thought that was just the norm,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Until I left. And I was like,
yeah,
oh, this doesn't exist everywhere else. So what I'm seeing on my end is I'm seeing those blended teams now become more of like the norm.
yeah.
But then also seeing like e-discovery analysts blended in with the traditional digital forensics, with the incident response folks, with the people that are performing operations and IT all coming together. And it, like you said before, they used to be very siloed. So you would think that there'd be territory issues, but it's kind of, did I go down?
You did, you did, you did.
What I was saying is kind of a big happy family in terms of taking all those siloed teams and blending them together now. So,
Absolutely.
and I think it makes the operations and the analysis piece more efficient. Like it
Yeah,
streamlines the entire workflow. You don't have to chase everything down.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I couldn't tell you the amount of times I've spent time, um, doing backups of our network, right, of our SAN and things of that. But it would have been so great to have someone else be able to do that, right, and facilitate that. Or someone new comes in the lab, you have to set them up and make sure, okay, well, where's running here? Do we have fiber going to your stuff? And all of that stuff, right? And being able to have someone do that frees up forensicators time to be good at what we do best, and have them focus on what they do best. So
Yeah, and it
yeah,
shares the mental workload too. I don't need to
absolutely,
worry about this.
absolutely, absolutely.
So shifting right into research, what are some interesting research projects you've either seen or you're currently working on?
Yeah. So one of the biggest ones that I've been working on this past year and continuing into 2024 is the whole notion of software as a service, how it works, not only from a forensic artifact perspective, because we use things like Microsoft 365, G Suite, and all of that in environments. And we're seeing more and more agencies adopt these solutions, but figuring out, what are the artifacts, the cloud related artifacts, which is obviously not going away. We've seen more and more of this. And so really it's been my focus has been around software as a service, not only from a like how does forensics play into software as a service, like in the future of forensics. I could very well see a time where potentially, when you're getting tools like Celebrite, Axiom, etc., you're using it in a software as a service environment, right? And so for those of you who aren't familiar, right, it's really that Netflix approach where um, pay as you go, consume, log in, and you have access, right? That kind of instantaneous. And so, my focus has really been around not only from an operational standpoint, how forensicators work in that environment, what's the future of that, but also as an opportunity as evidence, right? And so, how do we validate? How do we acquire data? that's hosted in that type of environment. A lot of research has been done as for other sort of cloud environments, whether that's infrastructure or platform as a service, but software as a service. Um, when it comes to emails and all of that stuff, I think there's a lot of more opportunity out there, and really one that's kind of neglected. And so, this past year, done quite a bit of fact finding in terms of understanding where the appetite in the industry has been. Um, Certainly, I think looking holistically across public sector and private sector in the commercial space is certainly light years ahead of, which makes sense, right? Some of them are. Um, Great creators of software of SaaS applications, and so they know how to do forensics, right? And it's really been really interesting to see on the commercial side, folks who've transitioned from law enforcement and from government, really like embracing and using what they learned um, in what we would consider dead box forensics and applying it to more cloud forensics, if you will. And so that's really been a big focus. And then spending really the first half of next year really on the more public sector and safety side of things, understanding their appetite for cloud software as a service, understanding like the artifacts that they need to know, um, and really doing more. I think a lot of it's bridging the gap. The knowledge base that's already existing on the commercial space doesn't necessarily, bleed over into the government space. And so, if you were to ask most forensicators, well, how would you acquire data from this cloud thing? They'd probably look at you and be like, give me a level DB, give me a level DB. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like, hey, it's totally different. They're like, hey, give me the device. And I'm like, you don't have any device available to you here. You have logs, right? And so, really, there's an education piece to that. There's a lot there. And so really, diving more on that because I think it's really going to be crucial for kind of where we go as an industry, and it's something that we just can't neglect. So
Where would you recommend people go to learn more about cloud forensics? Like,
yeah,
what's your favorite resource?
Sands does a phenomenal job. Huge plug to Sands there. Sands has done a phenomenal job on really preparing. You know the future of forensics as it relates to cloud, and so all of their cloud resources, not only from a course perspective, but they have obviously we all know. I'm surprised I don't have because I'm not home right now a Sans poster, but they have a poster, right? There's a poster. There's an app for that. There's a poster for that, and so they have great resources. There's various other different folks out there who are really kind of trailblazers in as it relates to cloud forensics. But again, really they've really come from like the commercial space, if you will. But there's a lot to be learned from government, law enforcement, forensic examiners from the work that they've done, and how it can apply to us because there'll only be a matter of time before someone comes to you and says, hey, there was this happened, and there potentially may not be artifacts, or we may be missing artifacts, that we're not grabbing because we're not connected. We don't grab data from the cloud. We don't do cloud, right? And that's the what I hear a lot from a lot of forensicators right now. So
Yeah, that big gap just because of operational.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep,
So speaking of SANS, so they actually, for folks that don't know, you do not need to take a SANS course to get access to the SANS posters. You just need to create an online, like just an account, and all the posters are there and they're updated annually. So I know that they have been helpful for me, and then I also pass those resources forward to people who are coming into the industry. But I think they do a phenomenal job of like highlighting key artifacts, or if you don't know where to start in your investigation and you're new to the industry, they have like digital forensics, basically Windows analysis 101, like on a poster, which is great.
yeah, yeah.
So, okay, so looking ahead into the new year, what do you anticipate some of the key challenges will be,
You know,
or
eh,
opportunities? I mean, if we don't
yeah,
want to focus on challenges, we can focus on opportunities
no,
too.
I think a lot. 2024. For those who are here stateside, it's an election year. Although every year is an election year, it's a big election year, and I think we saw, 2016. We've seen like cybersecurity, and a little bit of digital forensics kind of inserted into the electoral process with various, different, the whole concept of authenticity came out, and as me as a forensicator, I'm like, this is what we do, right? And so in 2024, I truly think when it comes to the whole concept of authenticity, and yes, there's all the AI and all of that, which I'm sure other folks have talked about as a trend, and I'll touch on that. But really, I think being able to validate what is authentic and what is not is going to be key. It certainly was before, but given uh, the election year, uh, advancements in generative AI and machine learning, et cetera, I think authenticity is going to be key. And just like we've grown and known, how to figure out if somebody was doing time stomping and anti forensic techniques, right? I think this is our calling as a profession. This is what we've done and what we continue to do. And so I think there's a lot that we can do in order to understand, um, from a proactive side, what is the industry, not necessarily forensic industry, but what is the tech industry doing about authenticity? And they're doing quite a bit. Adobe's been leading a huge coalition, which I've been a part of, the Content Authenticity Initiative, in which they are, as Adobe, right, the platform. You think about Photoshop, you think about all the great tools that they have available to them. Um, you can do a lot with Adobe products in order to change things, right? When it comes to
Yes.
photos and videos, and so it was really great to see them leading the charge of um, how do you determine what is authentic and what is not. And so I think there's a lot for us as forensicators to keep in mind of what they're doing. They are essentially creating new artifacts for us that we will need to be able to figure out. And so just like we've done historically with EXIF information, there will be other metadata that's potentially going to be out there that they've been working on in conjunction with the broader tech industry, journalism, alt media. And so I think there's a lot there for us to understand, not only what's going on, but also we may start seeing things and being asked to, was this generated, you know, by human, by a computer, et cetera. I think we're best positioned to do that as an industry. And then also, obviously, um, what I would consider more um, the use of AI to assist forensicators, almost like a chat assistant, like a chat bot, where forensicators can go to a LLM um, and actually be able to input things like what is this, right? Almost like the Ask Jeeves. And so I think
Yes.
we'll see like offline versions of that for forensics, right? That is very familiar with various different artifacts and various different places to go, because we talked about the posters from Sands, but just imagine like all the artifacts that are out there, how much they change and where things are located on a specific thing. And so I think we'll see maybe a little bit of that. Um, in the industry, the adoption rate will likely be low because I think there's a lot of concerns there. But I certainly think we'll start to see in the industry various different vendors, maybe a combination of vendors, academia, and industry, really kind of focusing in on some sort of co-pilot for forensicators um, to text the number to get the answer. Yeah, wow, yeah, Jared, yeah, like yeah, that was it, right? And it's just crazy how like life works, and we're like, oh my gosh, like AI, and it's like we've been doing some of the
We've been
functions of
doing this
this
for a bit.
for a very long time. So, right, so I think there's going to be a lot more of the hype. As somebody who loves technology, I get excited, but I don't get too caught in the headlines of pick a favorite newspaper, because realistically it's a lot of the same stuff just rebranded, and figuring out ways in which we can leverage it and understand you know what makes sense. So those are kind of say the two biggest things: authenticity, and certainly the rise in integration, figuring out what we do with generative AI or what we don't do, right? Is fair as well.
So what you're saying is ChatGPT is just rebranded from Jeeves. Ask
That's
Jeeves.
it. That's it. That's it. That's really it. It's
That's what I
it's
got from this whole thing. No, I'm
yeah,
just kidding.
yeah. Anytime you hear Chat GPT, just think of Ask Jeeves.
Man, all I can see is the little logo that they had
Yeah,
too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny because, in my spare time, I also teach as an adjunct professor, and people always are like, "So, what do you think about generative AI and ChatGPT?" And I said, "Well, do you remember Cliff Notes? Right? Cliff Notes was around. There were many books that many of us didn't want to read, but at the same token, Cliff Notes was out there, and your teacher knew, like, Cliff Notes wasn't enough, right? It maybe was enough to get you going, but it didn't do it. And so there were times, I'll be the first to admit, there were books that I needed to read in K through 12, and
Absolutely.
Cliff Notes, and it got me, you know, talking in the room, but it didn't get me. I didn't get great grades when I did that, right? I could see the difference, and so, like, that's what I really like akin, like, Chat GPT to, because of the hallucination that goes on, and stuff like that. And so I'm like, this, this has kind of been around from, like, Cliff Notes. This is Cliff Notes, and Ask Jeeves, and they had a baby called Chat GPT.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think the key word too is it can assist you, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
like Cliff Notes can assist you going into the right direction, but you're
yeah,
not gonna rely 100% on that. You still have to use your brain.
yeah,
And we hit on that in a previous episode too with Aaron Sparling. He had mentioned like critical thinking skills, right?
yeah, yeah,
And being able to use these tools to assist, but like not replace those skill sets. You still need to think on your own, and you still need to be able to analyze the data and explain how it got there and explain the storyline.
yeah, yeah.
So awesome. Well, what advice are you going to give digital forensic professionals, either seasoned or just starting out?
Yeah, I think seasoned professionals. My big thing is embrace the cloud. I was um, very skeptical around the cloud, doing forensics in the cloud. I always tell people, my last year in the government, AWS came and gave us access to try out AWS, and me and the rest of my team, we already came into a preconceived notion of, like, this is not going to work, and so it didn't work, and it was really our mindset. And so I think for seasoned professionals, I say embrace the change that is happening. It's not coming; it's already happening. Embrace the change that's already here, and what that entails. Whether it's new tools, whether it's new ways of doing what we've done historically. I'd say there's a lot of opportunity, and we as a profession don't necessarily need to hold back the future generation, the industry, in kind of our old way of thinking. And so that's what I would say to seasoned veterans, and certainly for folks getting into the industry. Network, show up to everything, ask questions. I've done quite a bit of mentoring with a lot of forensicators, and people who've wanted to get into forensics for the last couple years, and I've enjoyed that. And so I guess that's also for seasoned veterans as well. Is like the power of mentorship. I've found has helped me out as well. Right. Not only are you helping,
Right.
the future of forensics, but certainly there's a lot to be learned from us as well. I've learned from my mentees. Um, and then, yeah, so I think one of the things that a lot of my students will say is, well, how do I get started in forensics, because all the tools are expensive, right? Um,
Yeah, they are.
yeah, yeah, and they are, right. We're not. I don't think any of us in the industry, from a software side or on the vendor side, we're not charities, and so we have to make money. But what I'd say, for folks starting out wanting to get experience, like, I've had great success with my students in reaching out to, whether it's Magnet, whether it's whatever the vendor is, and getting either a research copy or a trial copy. Um, had a student, I think she had access to, like, just about every tool, minus the gray key, right? Like, she had access to everything besides gray key, which made sense. She didn't necessarily need it, but reach out, right? I'd say for the folks, reach out. There's a lot of data out there. Um, I think as an industry, we've been putting out a lot, and so there really isn't any excuses anymore, in saying, hey, yeah, it's like, it's expensive. Yes, it's expensive, but as a student, if you're able to prove that you're a student, you're doing research, all the vendors are really great in working with you. And then also, I think there is a lot. I mean, there's a new to cyber stands initiative. There's so many initiatives out there for folks wanting to get involved in forensics and cybersecurity. Um, to be able to practice and get hands-on experience with doing things. There's various different CTFs. We run. There's so many out there in the industry, and so that would be my advice to folks starting out, as well as kind of seasoned veterans as well. Is really embrace it, right? I think for everyone, embrace the changes that are happening in our industry, um, and yeah, 2024 is going to be a very interesting year for sure.
Yeah, it definitely already is starting out interesting.
It
So
is. It is.
we're gearing up, and it's gonna be a roller coaster. So hang on.
It is. It is.
And just to kind of speak on, people going in and talking about the pricing of the tool sets,
Yeah.
I think it's really important to hit on what these tools are doing and what they're
Yeah.
providing to you and
Yeah.
what those cases, like where those cases are going. You have to make sure integrity is preserved. You have to make sure everything is accurate. You have to make sure those tool sets are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then as analysts, we have to validate and verify all that information.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a price that's unfortunately has to be paid, but you're not paying for low quality
No.
like product at all.
No. No.
So I think that that's really important. But we've had folks just reach out and ask the question like, can I try this for free? Can I shadow you? Can I? And the answer is just ask,
Yeah.
ask.
Yeah.
The worst thing that people are going to say is no, and then you can
That's
just
it.
check it off and keep going to the next
Th-
person.
th-
But
That's it. That's it. And one of the things I think, as someone who's left government, and is out in the commercial space, and also doing some consulting on the side as well. One of the things I've seen on the consultative side, and a lot of folks do some form of consulting, whether it's full time or part time, etc. Um, I think one of the biggest things I've seen there is um, the importance of the tool belt approach. At the end of the day, like you, yes, we all have that favorite tool for those things, or that we've been used to. But I think pushing, us, as folks who've grown up with, let's just call it like the old dinosaur tool, to explore other things out there, and the great work that more, I could say, like disruptors are doing in our space. Right, I'm very big in understanding like who's the next fill in the blank, right? Like, because yes, there are the three that roll off of everyone's tongue, or two, or however many there are now, but like there's others out there. And so me, as someone, as a technologist, like I'm always like, well, who's the next this, and what are the free things out there as well, right? I think freemium is huge, right? Obviously Alexis Brignoni and others, great friend of mine, former coworker of mine, right? Like there's so much power in like the scripts and the community involvement in open source that also is neglected, right? You think about the big players, which they have their role and they play their place, but also the community approach, which I'm very passionate about, because we need that as well. And so that would be another thing as well. Is yes, the commercial vendors are important. They do great work. They will continue to do great work, but also, how do we? Who's next? Who's the future aiming, right? Like who is that, right? And you know, and how do we understand and embrace the various different technologies out there? Because the last thing you'd want to do is be like, well, yes, I did it, and I used this tool, and this is the only tool, and I didn't check anything else. When there's so much out there, where you can validate, for free, and use various different alternative methods. So
absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and all the different insights that you shared with us.
yeah, thank you.
The cloud perspective is awesome. I don't think we hit really hard on that
Good.
throughout the entire series. So good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you so much. Tomorrow is our final day of the podcast series. So it's the 12th day, and we have Ali Haddadi from Cyber 5W. So it'll be exciting to see what he has to say. So, all right. Thank you so much, listeners, and we will see you all back tomorrow. Bye.